إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we began last week the conditions of La ilaha illallah, explaining the Shahadah or the conditions of the Shahadah in order that every person can then understand and practice what is required of the Shahadah in the proper and appropriate manner. We began after the introduction by mentioning what the actual word condition means. In Arabic, shart. So what did we say the word condition means when we say the conditions of the Shahadah? What is a condition that we are talking about? Who can answer? No, knowledge was the first condition itself. Knowledge was the first condition itself. Before that, what does condition mean? What is shart? That's okay. So a condition, as we said, as a Shaykh Ubayd mentioned, المراد ها هنا ما يتحتم على المكلف معرفته والعمل به حتى يكون موحدا ظاهرا وباطنا. That which is obligatory, it is a must upon the individual of responsibility to know, have knowledge about and act upon. That which is a must for you to have knowledge about and to act upon so that you can be a person of Tawheed inwardly and outwardly. These are the conditions of the Shahada. The things that you must know about the Shahada, the things that you must know about the Shahada and practice with regards to the Shahada so that you are then practicing Tawheed in the proper manner inwardly and outwardly. The first condition then, as was mentioned, is knowledge. Knowledge was mentioned as the first condition with the two parts that go with it, and that is affirmation and negation. So who can explain to us what this means, that the Shahada is based upon affirmation and negation? Without looking at your notes. So that the Tawheed, it is built upon the negation and the affirmation, that you must negate all other deities, negate that they have any right to worship in truthfulness, and affirm that worship purely to Allah in every aspect of your worship. Whether it is worship from the heart, love, fear, hope, then that is done, affirmed for Allah alone, negated for anyone else. So your trust and your love and your fear isn't in other people, as some of the misguided ones do. They are more fearful of the deceased one in the grave than they are of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is mentioned in the books of Aqidah regarding some of the deviated ones, how they fear this deceased person in the grave, how they fear if they upset him that he could harm them and do things to them. So here every act of worship is affirmed to Allah alone, whether it's from the heart, whether it's upon the tongue, recitation, remembrance, whether it's upon the limbs, the physical prayer, hajj, etc. All of that is affirmed to Allah alone, and it is negated from anyone else besides Allah. So no act of worship can be redirected, done for anyone else besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The affirmation and the negation. Then there was the evidences from the Quran. There were certain ayat that we mentioned as evidences from the Quran, highlighting how this affirmation and negation, it is applicable. So who can remember any of those ayat that are a proof, that show within them affirmation and negation? As we've now explained, Tawheed, it is built upon affirmation and negation. To make somebody one and unique, you require an-nafi wal-ithbat, the negation and the affirmation. Like the example of the room and the person standing up. So there were certain ayat of the Quran which had within them this affirmation and negation. So who can remember any of those ayat? فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that there is no deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah. Very clearly identical to the Shahadah, the negation and the affirmation. Other than that, correct? Except for those who testify to the truth, وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ, and they know, they have the knowledge. How does that indicate the affirmation and the negation?
Knowledge of the fact that they are affirming exclusively the fact that they are affirming the worship exclusively to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, directing everything towards Him.
Correct. So the ones who know the truth, they know regarding the truth, then it is that they know all of the worship must be directed to Allah alone, and that it must be negated from anyone else besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There were the other ayat about the prophets and the messengers. What did they all used to say to their people? All of the prophets and messengers, they used to say to their people, Ya qawmi, Ya qawmi u'budullah, ma lakum min ilahin ghayruh. O people, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. You do not have any other deity to worship. Affirmation of worship to Allah, negation of it to anyone else. Allah mentioned in the Quran that every messenger was taught or told or commanded, given the revelation, to preach to the people that same message of Tawheed, built upon affirmation and negation, and that is the ayah. وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا, this too. But the other one, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتِ. That we sent to every nation a messenger preaching, أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتِ, and stay away from the false deities. Also Al-Anbiya, as you mentioned, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن قَبْلِكَ مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا نُوحِي إِلَيْهِ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاعْبُدُونَ. That we did not send a messenger before you except that we revealed to him that indeed he is the one deserving of the worship. There is no other deity besides him, so worship him. That there is no other deity besides me, so worship me, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these were various evidences. At the end also we mentioned the ayah regarding Ibrahim alayhi salam. وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ لِأَبِيهِ وَقَوْمِهِ إِنَّنِي بَرَاءٌ مِّمَّا تَعْبُدُونَ إِلَّا الَّذِي فَطَرَنِي فَإِنَّهُ سَيَهْدِينَ. When Ibrahim alayhi salam was giving the da'wah to his people, to his own father, to the rest of his people, then similarly Allah mentions in the Quran that he said to them, Ibrahim said to his father and to his people, indeed I am free and innocent of that which you worship. All of these other deities of yours, the sun, the moon, the stars, whatever it is that you are upon the worship of, I am innocent of all of that. إِلَّا الَّذِي فَطَرَنِي فَإِنَّهُ سَيَهْدِينَ. Except for the one who created me. So the affirmation of the worship to the one who created him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the negation of worship to all of these other false deities that they were worshipping. Start to gather this information in your mind. See how the prophets and the messengers, they gave the da'wah to their people. What the core of their da'wah was. And slowly as we go through, then you will begin to realize what the error of some of the people is nowadays. There are people who have fallen into misguidance with regards to certain acts of shirk, with regards to tombs and shrines and deceased people and all of the different and various activities they fall into. Then you begin to realize how they have not understood the reality of La ilaha illallah. So then after that, we move on to the section where we left off, which is an explanation of 8 different ways that help a person to gain knowledge of the Shahadah. 8 different things that you can study, 8 different ways of gaining further knowledge and understanding of what the reality of La ilaha illallah is. Because if somebody says then, okay, how do I learn about the meanings of La ilaha illallah? You're telling me the first condition is that you have to be upon knowledge regarding La ilaha illallah. So how do I gain this knowledge of La ilaha illallah? Here, one of the great scholars, Shaykh Abdurrahman As-Sa'di, rahimahullah ta'ala, who has passed away now, he mentions various different ways that a person can increase his understanding and knowledge of this very basic part of the religion, the Shahadah. He says, firstly, العلم لا بد فيه من إقرار القلب ومعرفته بمعنى ما طلب منه علمه وتمامه أن يعمل بمقتضاه، وهذا العلم الذي أمر الله به وهو العلم بتوحيد الله فرض عين على كل إنسان لا يسقط عن أحد كائنا من كان، بل كل مضطر إلى ذلك، والطريق إلى العلم بأنه لا إله إلا الله أمور. He says that this knowledge, when we talk about knowledge of the Shahada, then that is having an acknowledgement in your heart. It must be an acknowledgement in your heart, an understanding of the Shahada, meaning that you understand what the Shahada requires of you. Knowledge of the Shahada, meaning that you understand what the Shahada requires you to do. You testify that there is no deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah. So what does that now require for you to do then? How must you now behave? What is the mannerisms that you deal with the affairs if you are now testifying to the Shahada? What is necessitated of you if you testify to the Shahada? That is the meaning of having knowledge of the Shahada. Knowledge of the Shahada meaning that you now know what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to behave and how you're supposed to practice Tawheed. To have knowledge of that is having knowledge of the Shahada. As opposed to what? As opposed to somebody who says the Shahada, but he has absolutely no understanding or knowledge of what that necessitates. A person says the Shahada, but he goes and prostrates to the graves because he has no knowledge or understanding of what the Shahada necessitates from him. So knowledge is to have that understanding of what the Shahada requires from you as a Muslim. Not to just say it and then go and perform shirk and perform all types of actions that oppose the very nature of the Shahada. So here Shaykh Abdurrahman As-Sa'di says it is to have knowledge of what the Shahada requires of you to do as a Muslim. And then on top of that, it's not enough just to have knowledge and understanding of what the Shahada requires of you. It needs more than that. What is the more or the addition that is required on top of that? To then act upon that. So this knowledge of the Shahada, knowing what the Shahada requires of a Muslim. How are you going to be a person of Tawheed? When you have that knowledge, then by necessity to act upon that then. Not to simply just learn it all and to know it all, but then to abandon it and not practice it in reality. So to have the knowledge of what the Shahada requires of you, what it means for you to be a person of Tawheed, and then to physically go out there and practice that and be a person of Tawheed. as Shaykh Abdurrahman Sa'di says, this can be achieved in various ways. The first of those, أحدها بل أعظمها, the greatest of the ways to educate yourself and to learn what the very core of the meaning of the Shahadah is, تدبر أسمائه وصفاته وأفعاله الدالة على كماله وعظمته وجلاله، فإنها توجب بذل الجهد في التأله له والتعبد للرب الكامل الذي له كل حمد ومجد وجلال وجمال. The greatest of the ways for a servant to understand and to realize what is required of him with this great testimony is the knowledge. Remember, these are the various types of knowledge. To gain that knowledge of the Shahadah, the first is the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To learn about the names and attributes of Allah. Allah has names, Allah has attributes. A servant, a person ponders over the names and the attributes of Allah, learns the various names and attributes of Allah, learns and understands the meanings of them and how to behave as a consequence of them. So he realizes that one of the names and attributes of Allah is that Allah is the all-knowledgeable, the one who hears and sees everything. So he understands that this is one of the names and attributes of Allah. Therefore, the consequence of that is he practices and behaves in a manner recognizing at all times that Allah sees him. Through knowing that about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is the one who sees everything, hears everything, knows everything. When a person has knowledge of these types of affairs, has knowledge of the various names and attributes of Allah, he begins to recognize who his Lord is, begins to recognize who his Creator is, who and what it means when he is saying that only Allah has the right to be worshipped. He realizes what that statement really means when he looks into the names and attributes of Allah, looks into all of the narrations regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descending in the last third of the night, descending in the last third of the night to the lowest heaven, to the earth, and saying, who is seeking my forgiveness and I will forgive them, who is asking for repentance and I will give it to them, who is asking for anything else and I will give it to them. A slave, a servant, he reads this and he realizes this is from the names and attributes of Allah, that Allah descends to the lowest heaven. He reads the other names and attributes of Allah, that Allah hears everything, Allah sees everything, Allah is all knowledgeable of everything. Allah answers the dua of every person, hears the dua of every person, knows what is inside of yourselves. When a person starts to look into these affairs, the names and attributes of Allah, that is one of the things from the greatest types of knowledge. In fact, the scholars, they say the greatest type of knowledge is the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The greatest type of knowledge you can gain is the knowledge of your Creator, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here Shaykh Abdurrahman Sa'di says, the first of these affairs, and this is something which is an obligation upon every person to have this knowledge of the Shahadah. So the first of those ways to give you that knowledge of the Shahadah, the understanding of it, is to learn about your Creator, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why in the book of Shaykh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala, Thalathatul Usul, the three fundamental principles, one of the fundamental principles, the first of them is answering the question, Man Rabbuka, who is your Lord? And the whole section then explains that part regarding who is your Lord. Man Rabbuka, talking about the names and attributes of Allah, understanding the might and the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you look at the narrations regarding the throne of Allah, how the throne of Allah, the comparison of that to the footstool of Allah is like as if the footstool was a ring thrown into a vast desert. The ring is the example of the footstool. The vast desert is the example of the throne of Allah. Then on top of that, the example is given of the footstool compared to the heavens and the earth. That the footstool is like the vast desert, and all of the heavens and the earth that we are in now, this earth, everything is like the ring in that desert. Then you look at the example of the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That a bird, if it was to fly from the ear to the shoulder of one of the carriers of the throne of Allah, that angel, the bird, would take years upon years, hundreds of years, to fly that distance from the ear to the shoulder. Such is the might of the angels, the way Allah has created them. So if that is the greatness of the creation of Allah, what therefore of the Creator, the one who has created all of this? Those examples there are already outside of our imagination. That the footstool of Allah is like the desert, and all of the heavens and the earth are barely a ring within that desert. Then the footstool compared to the throne of Allah, the ceiling of all of the creation, is the same example, like a ring in a vast desert. So when a person learns these things, looks into the names and attributes of Allah, then a person gains understanding of who his Creator is, gains an understanding of who his Lord is, and as a consequence then has a better understanding of what it means when he says that there is no other deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah, because then he has a knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first thing the Shaykh says is knowing the names and attributes of Allah, because when a person knows that, it will encourage him and push him to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala further and greater, and to be in the obedience of Allah. The second thing, العلم بأنه تعالى المنفرد بالخلق والتدبير فيعلم بذلك أنه المنفرد بالألوهية. The second thing that the Shaykh mentions to allow you to better understand the Shahadah is to understand essentially the rububiyyah of Allah. The rububiyyah of Allah is the understanding, again affirmation negation, to affirm that Allah alone is the creator of everything, the sustainer of everything, the provider of everything, the one who gives life and death to everything, the one who controls and runs everything. To affirm that these actions can only be done by Allah alone, and to negate the fact that anybody else could participate in such actions. That's rububiyyah. To single out Allah with those particular actions that are specific to Allah. To single out Allah with those actions that are specific to Allah. So a person looks around, he sees the greatness of the mountains, he sees the oceans and the seas, he sees the rivers, all of this in creation, the sun and the moon, and he recognizes and he knows and he ponders that the creator of all of these is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. No other person, human, individual created any of these things. No other person, human, individual, anyone can give life or death. No other individual controls what occurs and happens in this universe. To recognize that these are affairs that are specific to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when you recognize that all of these types of affairs, life and death and control of the universe and providing for all of the humans and mankind and everything in creation, all of these things are specific to Allah, that then causes you to realize that therefore all of your worship must be directed only to Allah. Because how can it be that you recognize and you understand that Allah is the only creator of the heavens and the earth, nobody else? that Allah is the one who gives life and death and nobody else participates in that. Allah is the one who gives us the provisions and the food and the sustenance. To such an extent it is mentioned that the angel is sent to the child whilst he is still unborn in the womb of his mother, and the angel is sent to write down the provisions of that child in his lifetime. So you recognize that all of this is from Allah alone. How can you then possibly even consider giving any form of worship to someone else besides Allah, who you know does not give life and death, does not control the universe, did not create the universe? How could that be? And this is the example that Allah mentioned in the Quran as an evidence against the mushrikeen. Allah mentioned in the Quran many ayat where He talks about how Allah created the earth and the skies and the rainfall and all of these various things, the mountains, the rivers. And then that is all mentioned to highlight the proof against the mushrikeen. You know that Allah created all of this universe and controls it and gives life and death. So how can you then, after knowing that, possibly go and worship something else which you know didn't do any of that? Makes absolutely no sense. How can you know that Allah is the one who created everything? He is the one who gives life and death, but then you go and worship something which you know didn't create anything and doesn't give life and death? Is there any sense to that? None whatsoever. So by knowing that Allah is the sole creator of all of this universe you see around you, from the smallest of the insects that move on the ground and they walk, to the greatest of the mountains and the rivers and the oceans as they are. Parts of the ocean even to this day, as they say, they have been untouched by humans. Such is the vastness of them. You recognize all of this is the creation of Allah. That then makes you understand what the reality of La ilaha illallah is. Why you need to be making all of your worship just to Allah alone. There is no deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah. Because Allah is the sole creator of everything, sustainer of everything, the provider of everything. And no other individual can harm you or bring benefit to you except by the permission of Allah. That's why in the hadith it says, لو أن الناس اجتمعوا على أن ينفعوك بشيء لم ينفعوك بشيء إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله لك أو كما قال. That if all of the people they got together to do something good for you, everybody got together to give you some goodness, they would not be able to, unless it was something that Allah decreed for you. And if all of the people, وَلَوْ أَنَّ النَّاسِ اجْتَمَعُوا عَلَى أَنْ يَضُرُّوكَ بِشَيْءٍ لَمْ يَضُرُّوكَ إِلَّا بِشَيْءٍ قَدْ كَتَبَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ. And if all of the people got together to do some harm to you, then they would not be able to harm you except if it was something written by Allah in the decree. So you realize that the control of everything is in Allah, is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. None of this belongs to anybody in creation, not the Peer or the Sufi Imam or whomsoever it may be. All of that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by realizing that, it helps you to now understand what it really means when you say that none of these other deities have the right to be worshipped at all. Of course they do not, because all of these things we've just mentioned now, Allah is the one who does all of that alone. So He therefore is the one who is only the one deserving of the worship in truth. And those types of examples, if you give them to the people now who go to the graveyards, they go to the shrines, they go to the tombs, they do the tawaf around them, they prostrate to them, they slaughter there. Give them these types of examples. Tell them this person in the grave, what did he create of the heavens and the earth that you see around you? This person in the grave, does he give you life and death, and to the people life and death? This person in the grave, is he the one who sends down the rainfall? And of course they cannot say yes. So if the answer to all of this is no, and they accept that all of that is only Allah, then why direct your dua and your needs to this deceased individual in the grave when your dua should be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly? The third thing, الثالث العلم بأنه المنفرد بالنعم الظاهرة والباطنة الدينية والدنيوية، فإن ذلك يوجب تعلق القلب به ومحبته والتأله له وحده لا شريك له. The third way of understanding the Shahadah to a greater degree and practicing and implementing the Tawheed in the proper manner is to ponder over and to realize that every blessing you've been given, open blessings, hidden blessings you have, all of those blessings are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every blessing you've been given, open or hidden, privately to you or openly to everyone, all of those blessings are purely from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's as Allah mentioned in the Quran, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you try to count the number of blessings Allah has given you, you would not be able to do so. So many are the blessings upon you. The air that you breathe, the water that you drink, the food that you eat, the house above your heads, all of these affairs, they are all from the blessings of Allah. And from the greatest of those blessings is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you and placed you upon this earth and then sent you the guidance and guided you to Islam, sent the revelation with the prophets and the messengers and guided you to the way of Tawheed, took you out, the people, they were taken out of darkness into light with this revelation. They were taken out of shirk into Tawheed, taken out of bid'ah into sunnah. So you realize that the greatest of the blessings upon you is guidance, that Allah has guided you to the correct way. And that is why the scholars, they say, you must always remember that and be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for having guided you to Islam. Whereas you see so many of the people, they are not upon that way. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ used to make the dua regularly. Ya muqallib al-qulubi thabbit qalbi ala dinik. Oh Allah, the one who changes the hearts of the people, keep my heart firm upon your religion. Al-Imam al-Barbahari, he mentioned in Sharh al-Sunnah, a person should never feel safe and secure. Don't think that you've done so much worship, so much obedience, you're a person of Tawheed, you've been seeking knowledge, you feel secure, I'm safe. Never to feel this way, rather to be balanced between fear and hope, and to continuously make dua to Allah to keep you firm, because Allah is the one who changes the hearts of the people. In the narration it mentions, وَإِنَّ الْعَبْدَ لَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ حَتَّى مَا يَكُونُ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَهَا إِلَّا ذِرَاعٌ فَيَسْبِقُ عَلَيْهِ الْكِتَابُ فَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ النَّارِ فَيَدْخُلَهَا. That a person, he does the actions of the people of paradise, the good, righteous, pious actions of obedience. He does all of those actions in his lifetime until he is practically in paradise. All of the righteousness and goodness and piety that he's done, he's practically there. There is nothing between him and paradise, as the example mentions, except an arm span or a hand span. But then the decree is such that this person ends up doing some action which is from the actions of the people of the fire, commits some shirk, falls into some kufr, and in the end, as a consequence of that, throughout, even though he was upon obedience and worship and piety, that one action that he did of shirk or kufr or whatever it may be, it then lands him or ends him up in the hellfire. And similarly, the hadith says, maybe a person, وَإِنَّ الْعَبْدَ لَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ النَّارِ حَتَّى مَا يَكُونُ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَهَا إِلَّا ذِرَاعٌ فَيَسْبِقُ عَلَيْهِ الْكِتَابُ فَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ فَيَدْخُلَهَا. That maybe a person, he behaves in the mannerism of the people of the fire, disobedience and a lack of righteousness throughout. That's his behavior and his actions, until there is nothing left between him and hellfire other than an arm span, a hand span. But then the decree is such that he performs the action of the people of paradise. He changes to Tawheed and he abandons all of that shirk and kufr, and so he ends up in paradise. So in this way, a person, he recognizes that he is not safe and secure. Do not think you are safe and secure, that you have knowledge and I am sound and I am obedient. You continuously make dua to Allah to keep you firm. The example the Salaf they used to mention was Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam, the second greatest messenger from all of the prophets and messengers. After Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what? Imagine Ibrahim alayhi salam, the second highest prophet and messenger from all of them. What dua did he make to Allah in the Quran? رب جنبني وبني أن نعبد الأصنام. Protect me and my offspring from worshipping the idols. Why? إنهن أضللن كثيرا من الناس. These idols have led many people astray. The shirk has led many people astray. Ibrahim alayhi salam is making dua to Allah, keep me and my offspring firm and away from that shirk which has caught so many people. The Salaf they said, if Ibrahim alayhi salam is making this dua for firmness, then who are the rest of us to think we are guided and we are firm and we are strong and we'll never go astray? Who are the rest of us to think that we're safe and secure if Ibrahim alayhi salam was still making the dua to Allah to keep him firm and safe upon the path of Tawheed and to keep him away from the path of Shirk? So a person realizes that he must understand these great blessings of Allah upon him, the greatest of those being the guidance to Al-Islam. And when a person thinks about that, thinks about those people who are not upon this guidance, how empty their hearts are, how empty their lives are, uselessly walking around in the streets day and night, nothing of any benefit. And then you look at your own state, that Allah has guided you, that you are praying, that you're upon Tawheed, you recite the Quran, then this shows to you the great blessing Allah has given to you. So when you realize that, you then start to ponder and realize to a greater degree what La ilaha illallah requires of you. It requires of you to show your gratitude to Allah for this guidance, to show your gratitude to Allah for the guidance you've been given. Because the scholars they say, if you want to show your thankfulness to Allah for the blessings you've been given, then one of the ways of doing that is to use those blessings in the obedience to Allah. Whereas if you use the blessings to disobey Allah, then it is as if you are showing a lack of gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is the famous narration regarding that of the leper and the bald man and the blind man, that when Allah tested them and He sent an angel to them, and He went to each one of them, to the leper, the bald man and the blind man, and He said to them, what do you desire? And the leper wanted the good skin, the bald man wanted the good hair, and the blind man wanted the eyesight, so they were given all of that. Then the angel came back another time to the leper, who was now in a beautiful appearance after having what he required and wanted. So the angel came in the appearance of a poor man, and he said to him, I need one of your animals, one of your sheep, etc. But he refused. He said, these are my inheritance. I took them from my forefathers, I can't give you one. Even though that was from the blessing of Allah, he'd been given that. When the angel had come to him the first time, he had given him all of that, animals and herds. But he refused the blessing of Allah, he rejected it. He said, no, this is my inheritance, I can't give you anything. Similarly, he went to the bald man, the same thing. He said, I can't give you anything. And then he went to the blind man and he said, all of what I've been given, it is blessings from Allah. This is not my own doing, it's not my skill or expertise. All of this is blessings from Allah. Take as you please, I'm not going to stop you. So then the angel said, Allah is pleased with you and He is displeased with your other two companions. So this shows that a person must be grateful for the blessings that he has, and that is one of the ways of recognizing the importance of what is required of you from the Shahadah. Not to say the Shahadah and then to go and fall into shirk or to do your worship and obedience, your vowing, your slaughtering, your any act of worship to others besides Allah, but to direct that to Allah purely and sincerely. الرابع, the fourth affair, which will help you to gain a greater understanding of the Shahadah and a practice of the Shahadah. الرابع ما نراه ونسمعه من الثواب لأوليائه القائمين بتوحيده من النصر والنعم العاجلة ومن عقوبته لأعدائه المشركين به، فإن هذا داع إلى العلم بأنه تعالى وحده المستحق للعبادة كلها. The Shaykh says the fourth affair is what we see and what we hear about the reward that is given to the awliya of Allah, the people of Tawheed who practice that Tawheed, the reward that Allah gives them, the reward which may be in this world now, not necessarily delayed till the hereafter, the reward and the great virtues that they are given in this world, those who are upright and firm upon the Tawheed of Allah, and at the same time the punishment that is given to those who oppose the Shahadah and they oppose this Tawheed. When you look at that, it then causes you to realize again what the reality of Tawheed is. You look at the people, the awliya of Allah who practiced Tawheed and the great virtues and blessings and rewards Allah gave them from the stories of the past, the prophets and the messengers, the awliya of Allah, the Sahaba, the Salaf. And at the same time you look at the events that occurred to the people who opposed the Tawheed, and it causes you to realize that no doubt the Tawheed is the truth and that is what is deserving to be practiced to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you see how Allah destroyed all of those nations who opposed. They opposed their messengers, like the example of Nuh alayhi salam. When they opposed Nuh alayhi salam, they were all drowned in the flood waters that came. Rain coming from the skies, rain coming out from the springs in the ground, rainwater, floods to the levels higher than mountains. They were all drowned, those who opposed. Even the son of Nuh alayhi salam, the one who opposed, and he said, I will climb a mountain and that will save me, he was drowned also. Look at the example of Musa alayhi salam and Pharaoh. Fir'aun who opposed him and those who were with Fir'aun, how they were drowned under the mountains of water that crashed upon them as they attempted to follow through Musa alayhi salam as they crossed over the banks. So this is example, or these are examples of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed those people who opposed the Tawheed and they refused to accept that, and instead they remained upon their shirk. So by looking at those examples, you begin to realize even further the correctness of Tawheed and the implementation of it. At the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the mushrikeen, they used to say, مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. We don't worship these idols except for them to bring us closer to Allah. We're only worshipping the idols so they bring us closer to Allah. However, was that accepted as an excuse? هَؤُلَاءِ شُفَعَاؤُنَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. They said, these are only our intercessors to Allah. So was that accepted? That was still shirk. So when a person realizes that these types of claims, a person comes to you, he says, no, I'm only worshipping Allah, but he's prostrating to the person in the grave. These types of events, they are performing exactly the same as what the mushrikeen were performing. So when you look at the stories of the people of the past, what they did and how they were destroyed, it clarifies to you what the reality of Tawheed is and what was required of the people in the past, and they failed and they opposed, and so they were destroyed. Al-Khamis, معرفة أوصاف الأوثان والأنداد التي عبدت مع الله واتخذت آلهة وأنها ناقصة من جميع الوجوه فقيرة بالذات لا تملك لنفسها ولا لعابدها نفعا ولا ضرا ولا موتا ولا حياة ولا نشورا ولا ينصرون من عبدهم ولا ينفعونهم بمثقال ذرة من جلب خير أو دفع شر فإن العلم بذلك يوجب العلم بأنه لا إله إلا الله وبطلان إلهية ما سواه. The fifth affair to cause you to realize why Allah is the only one deserving of worship in truth is if you ponder over the various other types of deities the mushrikeen have claimed to worship as deities in the past. Who are these other deities? When you look at these other deities that they used to worship and you examine what they actually were and what they could actually do, it causes you to understand to a greater deal how futile the worship of those deities was, and how clearly only Allah therefore deserves worship. So what were the different types of idols and deities that they used to worship? At the time of the mushrikeen, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, from the famous idols that they used to have, Allat wal-Uzza wal-Manat. Allat, it is mentioned in one tafsir that it was a rock. It is mentioned in another tafsir that it was the grave of a deceased righteous man. In either case, if it was the grave of a deceased person, or if it was a rock, if they make dua to the rock, does the rock hear them? Does the rock answer them? Does the rock have any ability to do anything for them? The deceased person in the grave, does he hear them? Does he answer them? Does he have the ability to answer them? The answer to those questions is all no. You look at the other idols, Al-Uzza. Al-Uzza was 3 trees, and they had curtains around them, and in the middle was a jinni woman, and they used to go there and talk to it, and it used to talk back, and they used to take this as an idol. These trees and the jinni woman, what is that able to do for them? Again, the answer is nothing. Al-Manat, again a rock that they used to have a type of idol. In some narrations it says that when they used to go traveling and they would camp up for the night, they would go and gather some rocks. 4 large rocks. 3 of them they would put down to make a fireplace. 3 rocks down in a triangular formation, and the wood in between to make a fireplace. The 4th rock, why did they gather 4 rocks? Why did they collect 4 rocks if they could make a fire with just 3 of them? The 4th one they would put down next to them, and that would be their deity that they worship that night. This is what's mentioned in their narrations. They would go camping, or when they would go traveling and they camped up for the night, they would go and pick up 4 rocks. 3 of them they would use as their fireplace. The 4th one they would put down. That is their deity for the night. In other narrations it mentions when they would go traveling, or if they required a deity, they would gather dates and they would squash them together to form some type of statue idol shape. And that statue idol shape, that would be their deity they worship. Dates squashed together. And if they became hungry and there was nothing else, then they would steal or take some of the dates off their deity that they are worshipping, and they would eat it. This is from the complete and utter ridiculous and nonsensical nature of their worship of these so-called deities. It's mentioned in the Quran that even if a fly was to come, a fly came and took something away from one of these statues of yours, the statue would have no ability to retrieve that from the fly. In the example of Ibrahim a.s. when he went and destroyed all of the idols, and he put the hammer or the axe on the big one, and he said to them, the big one did it. They all knew, the mushrikeen knew, the big one couldn't have done it. The big one, they knew, this deity of theirs, they knew it can't move. They knew it has no ability to pick anything up and destroy anything else. It has no movement, it has no speech, it can't speak to them. Ibrahim a.s. said to them, ask them. How are they going to ask them? Their statues, their so-called deities cannot speak. So all of these things, when you look at the types of deities they used to worship, Ibrahim a.s. also mentioned to them the sun. They used to worship the sun. He said the sun. When it goes night time, the sun sets and it becomes darkness. Where's your deity gone now? What kind of a deity disappears? The moon. The moon is there. In the morning the sun rises, the light comes out, the moon disappears, you can't see it anymore. He said, what kind of a deity disappears? The light overcomes it. So he showed to them the futility of worshipping all of these other things that they were upon. All of these other things have no ability to aid you, to help you, to give you anything. The sun, the moon, the stars, they are all creations of Allah. Do not worship the creations of Allah, worship the Creator. The sixth affair, which will highlight to you the reality of the Shahadah. السادس اتفاق كتب الله على ذلك وتواطؤها عليه. All of the books of Allah, the revelations of Allah, the previous books that were revealed, in their original form, every one of them spoke about the Tawheed of Allah. Isa alayhi salam, he called the people to the Tawheed of Allah. He did not call to the Trinity. He did not call to the worship of him or his mother. And that's why it mentions in the Quran when it will be said to Isa alayhi salam, أَأَنْتَ قُلْتَ لِلنَّاسِ اتَّخِذُونِي وَأُمِّيَ إِلَهَيْنِ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Did you say to the people, take my mother and me as two deities besides Allah? He will say, Subhanak. He will say, may you be removed from this deficiency. I would not say something which is not my right to say. He did not call to Trinity. He did not call to any of those affairs. That was the da'wah of the people, the misguided ones who came after that. Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, he called to Tawheed, to the worship of Allah alone. Musa alayhi salam with the Torah called to the worship of Allah alone. When they crossed over the ocean, the sea, and they were saved from Pharaoh, it's mentioned that Musa alayhi salam and his people who had been saved, they were now on the other side of the riverbank or the water bank, and they were walking and they came across people who were worshipping these idols, worshipping these statues. So the people, they said to Musa alayhi salam, اجعل لنا آلهة أو إلها كما لهم آلهة. Make for us a deity just like they have all of these deities. So Musa alayhi salam said to them, إنكم قوم تجهلون. You are indeed a group of people who are ignorant. You don't know of this affair. This is not permissible. So he called to Tawheed, to the abandonment of worship of anything else besides Allah. Nuh alayhi salam, the same call. From Adam alayhi salam, Nuh alayhi salam, Musa, Ibrahim, all of the prophets and messengers with the same call to Tawheed. All of the revelations with that same call to Tawheed, which again cements and makes it firm in your mind. This is the correct religion. The Tawheed of Allah is the worship that is required of mankind. As-Sabi', the seventh affair, أن خواص الخلق الذين هم أكمل الخليقة أخلاقا وعقولا ورأيا وصوابا وعلما وهم الرسل والأنبياء والعلماء الربانيون قد شهدوا لله بذلك. The seventh affair is that the greatest of mankind. Who were the greatest of mankind? The prophets and the messengers. The prophets and the messengers were the greatest of mankind, the chosen ones, given the revelation, the best in terms of their opinions, the best in terms of their minds, the best of the creation. What did they, as the best of creation, all call to? The Tawheed of Allah. Nobody's going to deny that. All of the prophets and messengers called to the Tawheed of Allah. Therefore you say that who is the best of the creation from all of the people? No doubt the prophets and messengers. In that case, take them as an example. What were they calling to? The Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which again highlights to you the importance of that Tawheed. Al-Thamin, the eighth affair. ما أقامه الله من الأدلة الأفقية والنفسية التي تدل على التوحيد أعظم دلالة وتنادي عليه بلسان حالها بما أودعها من لطف صنعته وبديع حكمته وغرائب خلقه فهذه الطرق التي أكثر الله من دعوة الخلق بها إلى أنه لا إله إلا الله وأبداها في كتابه وأعادها عند تأمل العبد في بعضها لا بد أن يكون عنده يقين وعلم بذلك، فكيف إذا اجتمعت وتواطأت واتفقت وقامت أدلة للتوحيد من كل جانب. He says the eighth affair, which highlights to you the reality of Tawheed and why you need to be upon Tawheed and the importance of that Tawheed. He gives you the knowledge of what is required of you of the Shahadah, is by looking at the signs that Allah has placed in creation. The signs that you see out there and the signs that you see in of yourself, these are the greatest of the signs that indicate the oneness of Allah. These are from the great signs, the creation of Allah that indicates the oneness of Allah. That's just like they say in the example, if you're walking in a desert and you find some droppings in front of you. What do you know then? You're walking in the middle of the desert, abandoned, no dwellings, no houses, no nothing, in the middle of the desert. Not even any footsteps anywhere. Sandstorms, everything, no footsteps. But you find some droppings. What do you know? You know something must have been there. An animal must have walked past, even if there's no footsteps. Sandstorms can come and cover up the footsteps. But the droppings exist. The fact that you see these droppings there, it tells you that there's been a camel that's gone by or some animal that's gone by. Is anybody going to say or think to themselves, in the middle of the desert, away from any type of residence, they come across some droppings that look like camel droppings or something of that nature? Is anybody going to think to themselves, there's no possibility that there could have been a camel here, these droppings just appeared? They must have just appeared in the desert here. No camel or any animal could have walked past and done that. It is beyond belief. It is not acceptable. If you see the droppings, then you know there's been an animal that walked past. In the same way, then all of these signs, you see these great mountains, you see these great oceans, you see from the tiniest of the insects that walk. All of these things you see, and you're going to say that there was no creator that did all of that, they just appeared also? It is impossible. They mention an example that on one occasion one of the scholars, he was going to have a debate with some atheists, some people who did not accept the existence of their creator. And so he had an appointment with them, but he was late for the appointment. So when he was late, this Muslim scholar, he was late for the appointment. They said to him, why were you late? Our appointment was such and such a time, you have come late. He said, I was out in the ocean, I was out in the sea, and we ran into trouble, and we lost our ship, etc. And I was finding it difficult to get back to land. But then, alhamdulillah, the storm that was occurring, there were strong winds, etc. And at the shoreline, the strong winds blew some of the branches and broke them off. The strong winds blew and they broke off some branches from the trees on the shoreline. And the winds then carried those branches in the air in the whirlwind, etc. And they crashed into each other, these branches. And coincidentally, they fell into the ocean next to us in the shape of a boat. They had crashed into each other. The wind had blown them into each other everywhere in the shape of a boat, without any holes, perfectly joined up. So we got in that and we came back, and that's why I'm here now. They said to him, are you making a mockery of us? Are you making a mockery of us with this story of yours? Branches flew off the trees, okay, but then they crashed into each other with the wind in such a way that they perfectly joined up into the shape of a boat which floated, and you sat in it and came back to land. How do branches just randomly hit themselves in the wind and make a boat? You require a person to come and bend the branches and put them together and put the nails in. Don't make a mockery of us that the wind just put the branches together in the shape of a boat. He said to them, in that case, if you can't believe that the wind could blow a few branches together into the shape of a boat which floats? How do you believe that these vast mountains and these vast oceans and everything you see upon this creation did just by itself appear, if you can't believe that the boat could have just appeared in the wind by crashing together the branches? How do you believe everything else did just appear by itself, hitting each other, whatever theories they have? How do you believe all of the vastness of the creation did that, and you won't believe me with something simple as this, that a few branches managed to come together in the shape of a boat? So he refuted them from the very beginning, that it's not possible that all of this creation in its magnificence created itself, or it just came about. Rather, all of this what you see, it is a sign. That's why they say everything you see in creation, it is a sign upon the oneness of Allah. Everything you see, all these mountains, rivers, everything is a sign upon the oneness of Allah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created all of that, and that no other deity or individual has this ability to create in that way. These 8 points, they are summarized in this way, that if a person, he was to ponder over these types of affairs, he was to look into these, beginning at that first point with the names and attributes of Allah, gaining knowledge of these affairs, it gains, or it gives you a greater understanding of what La ilaha illallah is. It gives you a greater understanding of how to practice this tawheed. So we'll move on then to the next section after that, which is the statement of the author regarding the hadith. The hadith which is in Sahih Muslim, عن عثمان رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من مات وهو يعلم أنه لا إله إلا الله دخل الجنة. That whomsoever dies knowing that there is no deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah enters paradise. With regards to this then, with regards to this narration that whomsoever dies knowing that there is no deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah, knowing, and that's what we're talking about here, having the knowledge of the Shahadah and practicing it thereafter, of course. And so this hadith means the same as that. The wording of the hadith says whoever knows, has knowledge that there is no deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah and dies upon that, will enter paradise. But we now understand that it means knows and has knowledge, and that also then necessitates acts upon that. Not somebody who knows the tawheed but then goes and performs shirk, of course. Rather somebody who knows that and then also acts upon that. And there are many other narrations that indicate this, and this is basically to highlight the virtue and the greatness of tawheed. In another hadith narrated by al-Bukhari and Muslim, the hadith of Ubadah ibn Samit رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من شهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله وأن عيسى عبد الله ورسوله وكلمته ألقاها إلى مريم وروح منه والجنة حق والنار حق أدخله الله الجنة على ما كان من العمل. That whomsoever testifies that there is no deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah, Him alone without any partners, and that Muhammad is the servant of Allah and His messenger, and that Isa alayhi salam is the servant of Allah and His messenger, and the word that Allah cast upon Maryam and the soul that Allah cast into Isa alayhi salam, believes and testifies to all of that, and that paradise is true and real, and that hellfire is true and real, testifies to all of these affairs of Iman, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enter that person into paradise, whatever his level of actions. Some of the scholars, they say, meaning you will enter into the various levels of paradise, depending on what the level of your actions is. In another hadith, in Sahih Muslim, of Jaabir radiallahu anhu, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من لقي الله لا يشرك به شيئا دخل الجنة ومن لقيه يشرك به شيئا دخل النار. Whomsoever meets Allah not committing any shirk, he died not committing any shirk, and he meets Allah on that day not having committed shirk, then he will enter paradise. And whomsoever meets Allah on that day dies upon shirk, then he is the one who will enter the hellfire. So all of this again indicates to you the greatness of Tawheed. And perhaps one of the greatest narrations that indicates that also is the famous hadith known as Hadith al-Bitaqah. And we'll conclude upon this narration. Hadith al-Bitaqah, where a man will come on the day of judgment and his deeds will be laid out in front of him, and he will have 99 scrolls of evil deeds. Every scroll, when it is unraveled as far as the eyesight can see, that's one. Then the next one is unraveled as far as the eyesight can see, 99 of them full of evil deeds. Then it will be said to him, do you have any good? Do you have any good deeds? He will say, La ya Rabbi. He will say, no my Lord. No my Lord. But then it will be said to him, rather, you do have a good deed. You do have a good deed, and nobody will be oppressed on this day. So then one scroll will be brought out, one parchment, one item which says on it, La ilaha illallah. When that is placed on one side of the weighing scale, and all of those 99 scrolls of evil deeds are placed on the other side of the weighing scale, La ilaha illallah outweighs all of those evil deeds. It overcomes all of those deeds, and this indicates the greatness, the virtue of a person who dies upon Tawheed. Dies upon Tawheed, not committing shirk. That is the greatest of the objective. In fact, as the scholars have mentioned, the greatest worship you can worship Allah with is Tawheed. Worshipping Allah upon Tawheed, that is the greatest act of obedience. So inshaAllah ta'ala, we will continue with the second condition in 2 weeks' time. Next week is postponed. This particular lecture is postponed. There will inshaAllah be a separate lecture next week. There will be a separate lecture inshaAllah next week at the same time. But this particular book we will continue with in 2 weeks' time. InshaAllah ta'ala. The second condition on the 13th of December in that case, inshaAllah. But next week, inshaAllah, there will still be a lecture. There will be a general lecture again, like we did a couple of weeks ago before we began this. There will be a general lecture next week. And then in 2 weeks we'll carry on with this from where we left off on the second condition. So that gives you 2 weeks now to memorize everything from that first condition, to go over the workbook and know the answers to all of those questions. 2 weeks to memorize that properly, so that when we finish the book in the end, everybody knows these 7 conditions and knows them properly, is able to explain them. The purpose should be that at the end of the book, if anybody is asked, tell me what the third condition is about, tell me what the first condition knowledge was about, then in 2 or 3 months' time when we finish, you should know that. This is the purpose of knowledge. The Salaf, they used to say, Afatul ilm an-nisyan. The calamity, the disaster when it comes to knowledge is what? It's not actually here now. Now you're seeking knowledge, you're learning, you're writing it down, you're memorizing. The calamity and the disaster is that afterwards, you forget. You don't revise afterwards, or you don't revise properly, and it's forgotten. So in 6 months' time or a year's time, if somebody comes to you and says, what are the 7 conditions, you no longer know. That is not the purpose of knowledge. The purpose is that it is within your heart. That's why the Salaf, they used to say, Al-ilmu ma hawa sadr. Knowledge is what is contained within your heart. Books, you can have a library full of books at home. But the knowledge isn't the books in the library. The knowledge is what is in your heart. It is with you when you're home. It is with you when you leave your home and go anywhere. The knowledge that you are upon and you practice. So make sure that you revise properly. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for aid and assistance. Ista'inu billah. And learn and memorize it properly. And inshallah, like we say, in 2 weeks we'll continue. And next week there will be still a general lecture. Again, try to bring your friends, family, the folk that you try to give them da'wah. Inshallah, next week will be beneficial. And we'll conclude upon that for today. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.